The first thing I remember was the cold marble floor pressing against my cheek. The dazzling lights hanging from the ballroom ceiling spun wildly above me, blurring into streaks of gold and white. My ears rang so loudly that every sound around me felt distant, as if I were trapped underwater. Somewhere nearby, glass shattered. Someone screamed my name. Another voice shouted for help. The metallic taste of blood filled my mouth, and every attempt to move sent a wave of pain crashing through my body. When I finally managed to turn my head, my eyes locked onto a heavy brass centerpiece lying several feet away. Its polished surface was stained dark red. My blood. Across the room stood my father, breathing heavily, his face twisted with rage and disbelief. Just moments earlier, I had done something that should never have led to violence. I had simply said one word. No. But to understand how a family wedding turned into a crime scene, you need to understand who I was long before that night ever happened. My name is Cheryl. I'm 30 years old, and unlike most people in my family, I built every important thing in my life with my own hands. I work in construction, not the glamorous kind that appears in magazines or television shows, but the real kind. The kind that leaves permanent scars on your hands and dust in your lungs. The kind where mistakes cost money, time, and sometimes blood. While other people spent their weekends relaxing, I spent mine carrying lumber, pouring concrete, studying blueprints, and learning skills that most people never bother to understand. People were often surprised when they found out what I did for a living. Maybe it was because I didn't fit their stereotype. Maybe it was because society still expects women to stay away from hard hats and job sites. Either way, I stopped caring a long time ago. I never built things to impress anyone. I built them because I loved creating something real. Something strong. Something that would still be standing years after everyone forgot my name. That mindset came from one person, and one person only, my grandmother. She was the only member of my family who ever looked at me and saw potential instead of inconvenience. While everyone else treated my ambitions like a phase I would eventually outgrow, she encouraged them. I still remember sitting beside her at the kitchen table as a teenager, sketching floor plans on scraps of paper while she sipped coffee from an old chipped mug. She would quietly study my drawings and then smile before saying the same thing every time. If you're going to build something, make sure it can carry weight. At the time, I thought she was talking about houses. Years later, I realized she was talking about life. When she passed away, she left me something that nobody else in the family wanted. A small piece of land outside the city. It wasn't valuable in anyone else's eyes. The ground was uneven. Wild bushes covered most of it. There were no modern utilities nearby. To my parents, it was nothing but a burden waiting to happen. They called it impractical, a waste of time, a financial mistake. I saw something completely different. I saw possibility. While everyone else ignored it, I stood in the middle of that empty land and imagined walls, windows, foundations, and a future. For years, I worked harder than I thought was possible. I took extra shifts. I skipped vacations. I sacrificed comfort after comfort. Every paycheck that could have gone toward luxury went into building that house. I learned where every wire ran through the walls because I installed most of them myself. I knew every beam, every nail, every floorboard. There wasn't a single corner of that house that didn't contain a piece of my effort. When money became tight, I survived on the cheapest meals I could find. When exhaustion hit, I pushed through it. When injuries happened, I wrapped them up and kept working. There were nights when I questioned whether I could finish, but I never quit. Not once. What made it easier was knowing that the house belonged entirely to me. What made it harder was knowing my family never cared. During all those years, my parents never visited the construction site. Not one single time. They never asked how the project was progressing. They never congratulated me when major milestones were completed. To them, my achievements were invisible because they were too busy focusing on someone else. My younger sister, Melissa. In our family, Melissa had always been the center of gravity. If she had a problem, everyone rushed to solve it. If she made a mistake, someone else cleaned it up. If she wanted something, the entire family somehow found a way to make it happen. I was different. I was dependable. And in families like mine, dependable people are often taken for granted. Over time, I learned that being responsible came with an unspoken cost. The more capable you became, the more people expected from you. Eventually, they stopped seeing your sacrifices and started seeing your resources. Your time became their time. Your money became their money. Your success became something they believed they were entitled to. I didn't realize just how true that was until Melissa announced her wedding. The moment Melissa announced her engagement, the entire family treated it like a royal event. Conversations revolved around venues, decorations, guest lists, dresses, flowers, photographers, and every tiny detail that could make the day appear perfect. My parents practically glowed whenever they talked about it. For months, it felt as if nothing else existed. Every family gathering became another planning session. Every phone call somehow returned to the wedding. Everyone seemed determined to create a fairy tale. I should have recognized the warning signs. Families like mine rarely gather because they genuinely want to celebrate each other. More often, they gather because someone wants something. The wedding was held in one of the most expensive venues downtown. From the outside, it looked breathtaking. Massive glass windows reflected the city lights. Luxury cars lined the entrance. Elegant music drifted through the air as guests arrived dressed in designer suits and sparkling gowns. Everything was carefully designed to project perfection. But perfection is often just a beautiful mask hiding ugly truths. The moment I stepped into the ballroom, I felt something familiar settle over me. It was the same feeling I had experienced countless times throughout my life. The feeling of being present without truly belonging. People glanced at me before quickly looking away. Some smiled politely. Others barely acknowledged me. Conversations paused for a fraction of a second whenever I approached. It wasn't obvious enough to call rude, but it was noticeable enough to feel deliberate. I found my assigned seat near the far edge of the ballroom. Not close to the head table. Not close to my parents. Not close to Melissa. Far enough away to remind me exactly where I stood in the family hierarchy. I sat quietly and watched the celebration unfold. Melissa looked radiant. Her wedding dress fit perfectly. Her smile seemed effortless. Guests surrounded her everywhere she went. Cameras followed her constantly. She moved through the room like someone who had spent her entire life expecting attention and receiving it. My parents weren't much different. My mother floated from table to table greeting guests, while my father proudly shook hands and accepted compliments as though he personally deserved credit for the entire event. Together they looked like the proud parents of a successful daughter. And then there was me. When people asked about my work, my mother answered before I could. "Oh, Cheryl works with construction," she'd say with a tight smile. The way she said it always made it sound like an unfortunate hobby, rather than a profession. A distant relative leaned toward me during dinner and whispered, "That must be exhausting." I smiled politely. What I wanted to say was that building homes was far less exhausting than constantly trying to earn approval from people who had already decided not to give it. But I stayed quiet. I always stayed quiet. Years of experience had taught me that defending myself rarely changed anything. Dinner had barely begun when I noticed my father walking toward my table. The moment I saw his expression, a knot formed in my stomach. He wasn't carrying a plate. He wasn't carrying a drink. He wasn't coming to check on me. He was coming with a purpose. Richard stopped beside my chair without sitting down. One hand rested on the back of it while his eyes scanned the room. "Nice turnout," he said casually. "It is," I replied. A few seconds later, my mother joined him. That immediately told me this wasn't a random conversation. Whenever they approached together, it usually meant they had already discussed what they wanted to say beforehand. My mother smiled. It wasn't a warm smile. It was the kind of smile people wear when they're about to ask for something they've already convinced themselves they're entitled to receive. "We need to talk for a minute," she said. Every instinct inside me told me I wasn't going to like what came next. I was right. My father glanced across the ballroom toward Melissa before looking back at me. "Your sister is starting a new chapter," he said. I nodded. "She needs stability." I said nothing. My mother quickly continued. "A strong foundation. A place she can call home." Something about the way she emphasized the word home immediately put me on guard. I felt the conversation heading somewhere dangerous. My father lowered his voice. You already have a house. There it was. The knot in my stomach tightened. I stared at him, waiting for him to explain. Instead, he exchanged a brief glance with my mother. A glance that told me this discussion had been planned long before tonight. We've been talking, my mother said carefully, and we think there's a simple solution that benefits everyone. Simple solution. Those two words rarely mean anything good when spoken by people who expect someone else to make the sacrifice. My father folded his arms. You transfer the house to Melissa. For a second, I genuinely thought I had misunderstood him. The ballroom noise seemed to fade into the background. I blinked. What? My mother smiled again. As a gift. I stared at both of them. Neither appeared to be joking. Neither appeared embarrassed. Neither appeared aware of how insane the request sounded. My father continued speaking as if he were discussing a minor paperwork issue. It would help them tremendously. They're starting their lives together. It would give them security. I looked from one face to the other. The house. My house. The house I had spent years building. The house I had sacrificed everything for. The house nobody had helped me build. The house nobody had even bothered to visit. They were asking me to hand it over. Just like that. As though it were an old jacket hanging in a closet. As though it weren't the single greatest accomplishment of my life. I laughed once. Not because it was funny. Because I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Neither of them laughed. That's when I realized they were completely serious. My father leaned closer. It's the right thing to do. I felt my pulse quicken. The right thing for who? I asked. Neither answered immediately. Instead, my mother placed a hand on my shoulder. A gesture that might have looked comforting to anyone watching. It wasn't. It felt calculated, manipulative, deliberate. Family helps family, she said softly. I slowly removed her hand from my shoulder. For the first time that evening, something shifted in their expressions. A hint of irritation. A hint of impatience. As though I was already making this more difficult than necessary. And deep down, I had a terrible feeling that this conversation was only the beginning. For several long seconds, nobody spoke. The music continued playing somewhere across the ballroom. Guests laughed. Glasses clinked. Waiters moved between tables carrying trays of expensive food. To everyone else, it was a beautiful wedding celebration. To me, it suddenly felt like an ambush. I looked at my parents and searched their faces for some sign that this was all a misunderstanding. I found none. The more I studied them, the more I realized they had already decided how this conversation would end. They weren't presenting an idea. They weren't asking for help. They were expecting compliance. The same compliance they had received from me for most of my life. My father pulled out the chair beside me and finally sat down. Let's be practical about this, he said. Practical. The word almost made me laugh. There was nothing practical about demanding that someone surrender $500,000 worth of property they had spent years building with their own hands. Yet he spoke as if he were explaining basic mathematics. You're not married. I stared at him. You don't have children. Still, I said nothing. You live alone. Every sentence felt less like an observation and more like a justification. A justification for taking something that wasn't theirs. My mother nodded in agreement. Melissa is beginning a family. There are responsibilities now. Priorities. I felt my jaw tighten. The message beneath their words was becoming impossible to ignore. Melissa's future mattered. Mine didn't. Melissa deserved security. I didn't. Melissa needed a home. I could simply figure something else out. The unfairness of it should have shocked me. Instead, it felt strangely familiar. Because this wasn't the first time something like this had happened. It was simply the biggest example. Growing up, Melissa always received what she wanted. If she broke something, someone else replaced it. If she made a mistake, someone else fixed it. If she failed, someone else absorbed the consequences. Meanwhile, I learned to solve my own problems because nobody was coming to rescue me. At the time, I thought that made me stronger. Now I realized it had also made me useful. Useful people become resources. And resources get consumed. My mother leaned closer. Think about how much this would mean to her. I looked across the ballroom. Melissa was posing for photographs near the dance floor, laughing, smiling, completely unaware that her parents were attempting to transfer ownership of my entire life behind my back. Or perhaps she wasn't unaware. Perhaps she already knew. The thought settled heavily in my chest. I turned back toward my parents. Did Melissa ask for this? Neither answered immediately. That was answer enough. My father shifted in his chair. That's not important. The moment he said those words, something inside me hardened. Because it was important. Maybe it was the most important question of all. If Melissa knew about this plan, then she wasn't merely benefiting from it. She was participating in it. My mother quickly stepped in. Everyone wants what's best for her. I noticed she hadn't actually answered my question. Neither had my father. The silence told me everything. I suddenly remembered all the times Melissa had complimented the house. All the times she had asked questions about its value. The property taxes. The acreage. The market estimates. At the time, I thought she was making conversation. Now those conversations felt different. Now they felt like research. A cold sensation crawled up my spine. My father exhaled impatiently. You're focusing on the wrong thing. No, I said quietly. I think I'm finally focusing on the right thing. His expression darkened. That happened whenever someone challenged him. Richard liked agreement. He liked obedience. He liked being treated as the final authority in every room he entered. What he didn't like was resistance. And for the first time in my life, I was giving him exactly that. My mother attempted a different approach. Her voice softened. Her eyes filled with practiced concern. Sweetheart, nobody is trying to hurt you. The words almost sounded believable. Almost. Until I remembered what they were asking me to sacrifice. Years of work. Years of savings. Years of struggle. Years of loneliness. Years of determination. Everything I had built. All for someone who had never once offered to share the burden. I leaned back in my chair. What happens to me? The question hung between us. Simple. Direct. Impossible to avoid. My parents exchanged another glance. The answer came from my father. You'll figure something out. Just like that. No plan. No offer. No concern. No hesitation. You'll figure something out. The same words people use when they don't care what happens to you afterward. I felt something break inside me. Not dramatically. Not loudly. Quietly. Permanently. Because in that moment, every illusion I had spent years protecting finally collapsed. They didn't value me. They valued what I could provide. They didn't love my sacrifices. They loved benefiting from them. And the second those sacrifices became inconvenient, they expected more. Even now. Even after everything. Especially now. I looked around the ballroom once more. The flowers. The decorations. The expensive lighting. The smiling guests. The perfect photographs being taken every few seconds. Suddenly, none of it looked beautiful anymore. It looked staged. Like a performance. A carefully constructed image hiding something rotten underneath. My mother reached for my hand. I pulled it away. A flicker of surprise crossed her face. My father noticed too. For the first time all evening, uncertainty appeared in his eyes. Because they were beginning to realize something. The version of Cheryl they had always relied on was disappearing. The obedient daughter. The dependable daughter. The daughter who absorbed every disappointment and stayed silent. She was gone. And the woman sitting in front of them wasn't interested in being used anymore. My father straightened in his chair. His voice lost what little warmth remained. So, what's your answer? The question echoed in my mind. Years of exhaustion. Years of sacrifice. Years of being overlooked. Years of pretending things would eventually change. Everything led to this moment. One answer. One decision. One boundary. For the first time in my life, I wasn't worried about disappointing them. I wasn't worried about causing tension. I wasn't worried about keeping the peace. Because there was no peace to keep. There never had been. There had only been expectation, control, obligation, and guilt. I looked directly at both of them. Then I took a slow breath. And finally gave them the answer they never imagined hearing. No. The word wasn't loud. It wasn't emotional. It wasn't angry. But the effect was immediate. My mother's smile vanished. My father's face froze. And in that exact moment, I knew something had just changed forever. The reaction was instant. For a brief moment, neither of my parents seemed capable of processing what they had just heard. It was as if the word itself had broken some unspoken rule that had governed our family for decades.
No. Such a simple word.
Yet to people accustomed to getting their way, it sounded like rebellion. My mother's expression hardened first. Don't be difficult, Cheryl. There it was. The familiar accusation. Not unreasonable. Not unfair. Difficult. Because in families like mine, refusing exploitation is often treated as cruelty. My father leaned forward. You always help this family. I have helped this family, I replied calmly. Then help one more time. I shook my head.
No.
The second refusal landed even harder than the first. The temperature around the table seemed to drop. Their polite masks began slipping away. My mother's eyes narrowed. Think about your sister. I am. Then act like it. I looked directly at her. For years I've acted like it. Neither of them liked that answer. Because deep down they knew it was true. I had spent most of my life sacrificing without recognition, giving without receiving, showing up without being appreciated. And now, for the first time, I was refusing to pay another price. My father pushed his chair back. The movement was sharp enough to draw attention from nearby guests. You wouldn't have anything without this family. The statement hit me like a slap. Not because it was true. Because it wasn't. The land came from my grandmother. The house came from years of my labor. The sleepless nights were mine. The injuries were mine. The sacrifices were mine. Every nail. Every wall. Every payment. Mine. I stood slowly. The land came from Grandma, I said. The house came from me. The silence around us grew heavier. Nearby conversations began fading. People were watching now. My mother glanced around nervously. She hated public embarrassment. Ironically, she was creating it. If you leave right now, she warned, things will never be the same. I almost laughed. Because she was right. Things would never be the same. But not for the reason she believed. I picked up my bag. I'm not giving away my home. My father stepped closer. Sit down.
No.
I said sit down.
No.
Years of frustration flashed across his face. Years of entitlement. Years of control. Years of believing his authority could never be questioned. And then something inside him snapped. At first, I didn't realize what was happening. I simply turned to leave. 2 steps. That's all I managed. Then I heard movement behind me.
Fast.
Violent.
Heavy.
I started turning. Just enough to catch a glimpse of my father's face. The rage there barely looked human. His hand gripped a heavy brass centerpiece from the table. There was no warning. No hesitation. No second thoughts. The object swung through the air. Then everything exploded into white light. The next moments came back in fragments.
Pain.
Voices. Screams.
Blood.
Chaos. People running. Someone shouting for security. Someone calling an ambulance. And through it all, my father yelling that I had brought this on myself. Then another voice cut through the room. Firm. Controlled. Uncompromising. Daniel. Melissa's fiancé. He stepped between us and prevented things from becoming even worse. Security arrived seconds later. Paramedics followed. And for the first time in my life, strangers protected me more than my own family ever had. At the hospital, doctors confirmed a concussion and a serious head injury. As I lay in that hospital bed, staring at the ceiling, one truth became impossible to ignore. My father hadn't lost control because I was wrong. He lost control because I had finally stopped obeying. Later that night, Daniel visited. What he told me changed everything. For weeks he had been investigating financial problems involving Melissa. The results were devastating. Massive debt, hidden accounts, missed payments, loans nobody knew about. Financial obligations so large that they threatened to destroy the future they had been building. Suddenly my parents' demand made perfect sense. They weren't trying to help Melissa start a life. They were trying to save her from the consequences of her own choices. And my house was their solution. Not because it was fair, because it was valuable. The wedding wasn't just a celebration. It was an opportunity to pressure me into surrendering $500,000 worth of property. When Daniel discovered the truth, he ended the engagement immediately. The next morning, videos from the wedding spread online. Footage showed the argument, the attack, the aftermath. People saw exactly what had happened. For years, my parents had relied on secrecy. Now, there was nowhere left to hide. Police opened an investigation. Witnesses came forward. Security footage confirmed everything. Relatives who had spent years ignoring reality suddenly found themselves confronted by it.
Some supported me.
Others pressured me to stay quiet. My mother's messages begged for forgiveness. My father's messages blamed me for his actions. Neither changed anything. For the first time, I stopped protecting people who had never protected me. I told the truth. Nothing more. Nothing less. The legal process moved quickly. Evidence was overwhelming. Witness testimony was consistent. Video recordings removed any doubt. When the judge delivered the final ruling, there were no dramatic speeches and no emotional outbursts. Just consequences. Real consequences. The kind my family had spent years avoiding. As I left the courtroom, I felt something unfamiliar. Relief. Not because I had won, because I was finally free. The months that followed were quiet. My father lost much of the reputation he had spent years building. My mother continued offering apologies that never quite became accountability. Melissa disappeared from my life completely. And for the first time, I allowed her to. Healing wasn't immediate. Some days were harder than others. The physical injuries faded faster than the emotional ones. But every morning I woke up inside the house I had built. The house that represented every sacrifice, every lesson, and every ounce of determination I possessed. No one could take it from me. Not anymore. Eventually, I realized something important. The greatest loss of that night wasn't a wedding. It wasn't a relationship. It wasn't even a family. The greatest loss was an illusion. The illusion that love requires self-destruction. The illusion that loyalty means surrendering your boundaries. The illusion that being family automatically gives someone the right to control your life. A year later, I often sit on the back steps of my house at sunset. The same house they tried to take. The same house they said I didn't deserve. The same house built by my own hands. And as the evening light settles across the walls, I think about my grandmother's words. If you're going to build something, make sure it can carry weight. For years, I believed she was talking about buildings. Now I know she was talking about people. Because sometimes the strongest thing you'll ever build isn't a house. It's a boundary. And sometimes the most important word you'll ever say is the one that changes everything.
No.